Hey friends, welcome back to the show. Today we've got an absolutely incredible episode lined up for you. I'm beyond thrilled to welcome a dear friend, a Jesus-loving powerhouse, and a newly published author, Shannon Baker. Her debut novel, When the Mountains Called, is a beautifully crafted story that blends fiction, faith, and the raw reality of grief. Through the eyes of Andrew, a longtime griever, Shannon invites us on a journey filled with mystery, hope, and the kind of gentle nudge Jesus gives us to come and see what it really means to live boldly in hope. Trust me, you don't want to miss this conversation. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive into the heart of the mountains with Shannon Baker. Hey friend, welcome to the Between the Pages podcast, where we explore navigating life's peaks and valleys with bold faith. Join us bi-weekly as we dive into meaningful conversations with guests, team members, and community leaders. Together, we'll tackle topics that challenge and encourage, helping you live out your faith between the pages of everyday life. Well, hey friends, welcome back, and we are in our mid-season finale for season 3 of the Between the Pages podcast, and I'm so glad that you took the time to join us for this conversation, and I'm so excited that we have a dear friend. Shannon is joining us on the podcast to talk all things ministry, life, and her newly published book, When the Mountains Called. Shannon, welcome!
Thank you. So good to be here.
It's so good. I feel like we are in like this full circle moment of like growing up together in elementary school, like kind of like watching each other grow through like college and getting reconnected. And I remember the first time we reconnected post-college and just spent probably like hours talking about Jesus and life. And I was like, she's going to be on the podcast one day. And here we are. Here we are. And I also have Jenny with us. We can't leave my girl Jenny out.
Oh, we're all good. I'm just enjoying the conversation. I'm so excited to see you again.
Me too.
And connect over this and hear about your book. That's so exciting. And we're just so excited to share, like, what do you have to say with everybody?
Absolutely. Well, we have a lot to kind of just like dive into. And I first want us to just kind of dive into you, Shannon, and tell us a little bit about yourself, like who you are, what you like to do for fun. Who is Shannon Baker?
Great question. I feel like it's funny because I was thinking of, the times we used to really hang out. We're on the soccer field. So I feel like, and you know me from Girl Scouts, so it's not my person anymore, but still really into sports. So you can usually find me doing something active. I've always been a writer. We used to write stories. I don't know if you had Mrs. Bartell in second grade, but we would write stories every Friday and share them with the class. So that's the one thing about me from my elementary days with Rebecca that has stayed the same. I'm just writing all the time. I'm a seminary student, so finding time to write for fun in between not writing for fun essays.
Yes.
I have a Greek final this week, and then we're done with semester 1, so that's exciting. Other than that, I mean, I love nature. I love the outdoors. So in the things that I write and the conversations I have, that usually comes up. Just doing things outside. Duluth is a great place to be for that.
Hence, When the Mountains Called.
Correct.
Which I want to like save that for a little bit later because there is a really powerful, incredible story behind that. And I remember when you told me kind of the background of it, I was like, I got the chills. I was like, ooh, this is so good. Like, and I'm so excited to see how people like come to know Jesus through your book and just through this podcast and the conversations that you have with people. But to kind of just like, dive into your story, you were in Mexico for about, what was it, like a year?
10 months, yeah.
10 months, so almost a year, practically a year.
Mm-hmm.
Doing some mission work and, faith-based kind of podcast here. Where have you kind of like seen your faith evolve through like, let's maybe start middle school, like middle school, high school, college, because I know there was like a lot of like up and down in your story. What was kind of like your journey with church, like that got you to making that decision of, yeah, I'm going to do mission work in Mexico? Like that's not something that you just wake up and decide.
Right, no. But like how much time do you have? I mean, growing up, I went to a really small traditional Lutheran church up the shore, French River. But for me, church was like school. like I love school. You can attest.
Yes.
I loved school. I loved learning. And then going to confirmation class every Wednesday was just like more school. So I knew a lot about God. But it didn't really, like, the idea of having a relationship with Jesus was not something I really knew about. And in a traditional Lutheran church, it's not like it's not that you don't talk about that, but there are other denominations that maybe focus more on that. And I wasn't part of those denominations. So then in college, I was part of various like student-led faith groups. And I went on a mission trip to Nicaragua with a group. Looking back, there's a lot of things about the mission trip that I think were done really well and a lot of things that maybe weren't. But one of the things that happened was, I mean, like I had a Holy Spirit encounter. And not everyone can say that. That's not everyone's story. But I just remember worshiping with everyone in this little concrete church and hearing the question in my heart, like, what are your priorities?
Ooh.
And I was in a picture perfect relationship. I had, I was going to be a doctor. I had all these things lined up. And then God asked, what are your priorities? And I just like broke down crying and started saying like, I'm sorry. And I didn't know why I was sorry. I was like, what are you like outside looking in? I was like, what are you doing? Stop. Everyone's looking at you.
Yeah.
No one was. Like everyone was having their own moment.
Yeah.
But after that, I came home and changed a lot of things about the way I was living and who I was living life with. And not that they were in any way bad people, but just was moving a different direction. And after that, started to think about how my passions, like, it had nothing to do with medical care. I was resting in reputation in the hope for financial security, and that wasn't truly my passion. And so I started leaning into more like language learning. I studied Spanish and loved it, studied English writing and loved it, and was like, I don't know how I'm going to have a career out of these things, but it feels more faithful to walk this path than what I was doing. And just really focused on getting to know God. And so that mission trip changed my life. And then, so I've always had a soft spot for mission trips. But after college, went to a variety of different ministries in the midst of COVID, because if you graduated in 2020, it was rough.
It's like a new like species of like
Correct.
human of graduating. I was a 2019 grad, so like I still had the like commencement, but my brother was 2021, and even just like going to his, I was like, this is weird.
Yeah.
Like you had this like, huge accomplishment, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa. Which I feel like is, going back to that question of like, what is your priority? Is so big. And I feel like COVID like really shifted that for a lot of people. I know for me even too, like that question came up multiple times.
Yeah, no, that's a super good point, because my priorities shifted completely when COVID derailed everything, and ended up serving with a ministry in the national parks for a year. And that's where I started writing this book. And then after that, just felt this nudge to serve abroad, but had seen how like mission trips can sometimes be harmful if they're not done well. And so I really wanted to serve long-term somewhere, because if you've ever been on a mission trip, it's like you don't really get to know the people or the culture that you're staying in or the place you're staying. But if you spend somewhere long-term, you not only get to know them, but you like become part of people's lives. And that relationship building is the most important mission you could have on a mission trip. So I don't know. I just kept pursuing the nudge, and then had various conversations that led me to the program in Mexico.
That's so cool. Oh, I was just thinking as you were talking, like how, God can always like kind of not like test you in a way, but I feel like can kind of be like, okay, you're going to ask yourself this question, and it's going to totally like change your life. But also the fact that you're like, I was holding on to financial security, but I love the line that said like, but this way felt more faithful. Like that's so, so powerful. Like how many times have you like, I mean, just in general, like in my life that I've been like, this way feels more faithful. Like, and I aspire to like be that and be like, this way is a faithful way, and to like lean wholly into God that he will provide.
That's huge, huge. Because I work for a small Christian school, who we almost didn't have a middle school and high school this year just because of like enrollment issues and tuition and things like that. So it was like a week's time where we were like, okay, job security, like question mark, and just like moving in that step in faith, like that's huge. And wherever your mission field might be, whether it's in another country or at a place that you work at, that's so neat that you have that genuine connection and you know where your faith is taking you because you know God has it and you don't have to worry about it crumbling whether you lose your job or not.
Yeah.
So that's really, really cool.
During your time in Mexico, what was kind of like, you know, that experience like for you, for your faith? Because you're now entering into this country, you know, probably no one. And like you said, you're about to insert yourself into the lives of these people and get to know them and share the love of Jesus. And what was that kind of like experience like for you personally, like having gone through, you know, and we'll kind of dive into your experience with the national parks, but kind of coming post that experience, like the healing, the finding yourself in this new culture.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the good thing about this program is we weren't sent anywhere that didn't have a pre-existing relationship. So even though I didn't know people, the program knew them and was invited there. So it felt like I wasn't totally intruding. It felt like they wanted me there, which is healthy. And the thing is I had 2 different assignments. I served 2 Lutheran churches. One was in the city and one was rural. I was in Guadalajara, Mexico. And then I also served at a Catholic-run migrant center doing everything under the sun at the migrant center, but like interviewing migrants who would come and figuring out their needs, if it was like medical, legal, or just a place to stay for a few days. And then, so those 2 assignments were really different, but I feel like I really learned a lot about like interdenominational work because the Mexican culture, Mexican Christian culture has its own perceptions about denominations. So like here in the US, we have, you know, some denominations work really well together. And then sometimes we run into differences that seem to divide people instead of unite them. And so getting to be part of this Catholic ministry was really interesting because I didn't have a lot of experience with the Catholic Church in the US. But then like the Mexican Catholic Church has a lot of stigma around it too, things they've done well in the past and things they haven't. And hearing that from my Lutheran community, but then experiencing just like this really transforming love from the Catholic place that I was serving was like, I felt like I was on the outside looking in to another country's experience of interdenominational challenges, which was really eye-opening because it gave me a heart to like come back here and really care about Christians working together across denominations. Because in my mind, the thing that unites us, Jesus, is more important than the stuff that divides us. But I was able to see, I was able to see how that really affected the 2 different places I was serving in Mexico. And there were ways that they worked together, but being an outsider, you can see maybe some ways that people entrenched in the situation can't always see for themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you have any?
I do.
You do? Okay.
Well, as you were talking, there's a book I read called When Helping Hurts, and it's about the mission
I
field.
take it you've read that book.
Yes.
It was like humbling and also like, wow, I never thought of it in that perspective before. And then like a little bit of like guilty a little bit, like, wow, not shaming in the sense where it was like, you shouldn't give money to missions because you don't know where that money's going. But it was just so interesting how some, like you were saying, some programs do it really well and some others need, you know, some help and support in ways that they maybe haven't seen it before. And one of the stories was, I think he was a doctor and he was attending to this woman and gave her like, you know, the medication that we use here in the United States, but then he left. And so she got addicted to that medication and it just made her life worse. And she just spiraled into that mental health crisis that she was having because he thought he could put a Band-Aid over that huge wound. And it wasn't an easy, simple fix. It should be that long-term kind of relationship building and emphasis on mission. So I love that you have that heart for that and that passion. That's so good to hear about.
That's so well put. Like, I love that book. We read it. I was a global missions coordinator at a church in Des Moines before I went to Mexico. And we read that book because sadly, like there's a lot of like Christian history with missions isn't the healthiest. And like, you know, as a church, acknowledging that helps us do better. But just what you were saying is like, I don't know, something I kept in mind, because with the program in Mexico, the reason I picked it is because they care so much about relationship that when we leave, it's not like, when we leave, the organization keeps doing the work they're doing, which is sustainable. And it's not like somebody showing up, giving medicine, and then leaving with all the supplies. But it's instead being like, I showed up and I learned just as much from them. And then my real mission is to take what I learn and go back to my community. Whereas I think sometimes American missions, we think like, oh, I'm going to go do the thing. And then we come back and we're just like, that was great. What a high, which is like the downside of mission trips, because it's just this like such a finite experience. But if we can come back and be like, you know what, my story, like God has me doing something so much bigger than just going on a trip or going on this thing in Mexico for 10 months. Like this is just part of the story. And my job is to come back and figure out how I keep writing it with him when I'm back, and not just shove that experience aside as like a one-time thing.
Absolutely. And when you talk about, continue to write that story, going into your debut novel as a published author, how does that like sound, feel, all the things like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I do remember when we were in grade school, like middle school together, you were always writing. I'm pretty sure I still have somewhere like a book that you wrote all of like your friends or something. I'm pretty sure you wrote like this like mini little picture book, and I'm pretty sure I have it somewhere still. And I was like, that's a Shannon Baker original. That will be worth millions. I know. I'm like, this thing's gonna be worth millions one day. I'll bring it and I'll need the author's signature inside the book. But part of, this whole experience of you like writing this story with Jesus in like graduating college in the midst of a pandemic and heading into the national parks for a year, finding this heart for ministry, like kind of writing this beautiful narrative with the Lord of here's what American missions is currently and how can I play this role into changing that narrative here in America of building relationships with people, like not just doing it for, I think some people go to be like, oh, I went on a missions trip. Like, look at me. It's like I get to go on this mission trip to serve and help people, and I want to learn as much as I can during my time with them of like who God is, who they are, and like ultimately you're gonna find something about yourself that you probably didn't realize that you were gonna find, and then kind of coming back and be like, okay, like, how can I continue this ministry work in my community? And you have this debut novel that you've been working on for quite some time and started in your time in the national parks. And so I kind of want to backtrack a little bit here to that particular time and tell us like what that experience was in terms of like what you did, like what was kind of like some highs, lows that you kind of saw Jesus in and amongst in that time period.
Yeah, so the ministry is called A Christian Ministry in the National Parks.
Love
Original.
Right. It's exactly what it sounds like. ACMNP is the acronym. Yeah. So I love that ministry. The whole, again, it's relational focused. So you are assigned a particular park, a national park in the country that you go to, and you serve either a summer or a winter there. And while you're there, you just work in like a concessionaire job. So, when you go to Glacier National Park, there's like a little Glacier grocery store that's part of the National Park Service. If you had been there in summer 2020 and walked into the mercantile, like that's where I worked. So that was my job for 40 hours a week. But then the goal of the ministry in our off hours was that we would build relationships with other seasonal coworkers because the seasonal work world in the parks is its own culture. It's very adventure-based. People are chasing a lot of highs in more ways than one. And it's very transient. Like you have a job for the summer, but you might move somewhere for the winter. So it's very unstable in that way. But people who are in it love it for the adventure of it. But we also noticed that sometimes not having a stable place led people down some darker paths or just an unstable lifestyle. And so our goal was just to build a relationship with them and invite them to different ministry things that we would have. Those little amphitheaters in the park. Mm-hmm. We would lead worship there on Sundays. So I don't profess to being a great guitar player, but like you do what you got to do and you make do with what you have. So we would give talks on a Sunday and then visitors would come to those. But so I was assigned to Glacier National Park for the summer in 2020. And I just thought it was going to be like this cool thing I would do in between the plans I had after graduation, but like waiting for COVID to end. But it ended up being just like a really beautiful and really hard summer because so when I arrived, there were, I want to say 10 other teammates of mine there. And one of my teammates became a good friend of mine in the short span of a few weeks. And his name was Josh. And and so we hung out a lot as a team. And then Josh and I would go for hikes and just really got to know one another. And then we got the news as a team one day in July that Josh had had a hiking accident because he was kind of a daredevil and just really bold. And so he was out hiking with another teammate of ours and then slipped and fell. And so passed away in the park. And so, you like the whole summer shifted after that. It wasn't just about doing this thing for the summer. Like suddenly we were grieving together as a team. We didn't know each other before June, and suddenly in July, like it was essential that we had each other.
Yeah.
And so that was really hard for me because I felt like even though I'd only known Josh for a short period of time, you meet somebody and you just feel like you know somebody. And so we really clicked, and he was really invitational and intentional and just embodied a lot of things that I see Jesus embodying. And so it was really hard. And so after that, I spent the winter in the Smoky Mountains with ACMMP again, but with a different team. And so during all this, I was writing this story. And I don't know if you want me to get into why the story came about or not, but
totally up to you and what's going to be kind of most comfortable, but also beneficial in honoring Josh and the book and the story behind. So you do you.
Well, I really see God in it. So I mean, it was 4 years ago, and obviously grief is a journey. But so before I got to Glacier, a friend of mine from college had asked me to write this story. He's a philosophy and music composition major, and he was like, "Can you write something that's just thought provoking?" And I was like, maybe, but he's like, maybe set somewhere nature based. I was like, yeah, you're preaching the choir. Sounds great. So I actually wrote the first chapter of this book before I ever got to Glacier, and through some coincidence, decided it was going to be about a man who was grieving the loss of his wife. So I wrote this first chapter, and then I got to Glacier, met Josh, was with my team, enjoying the summer, and then Josh passed away. Before Josh passed away, I had this picture come to my mind of a river, and it was a river of healing. And I wrote this scene, which you can find at the beginning of chapter 2, and I just had it written and was like, this is really cool. And then Josh died, and suddenly this image of a river of healing, it was I feel like God gave me the picture for me. And I didn't touch the book for the rest of the summer, but my friend Caleb, he was super understanding. He was like, dude, take your time. It's okay. And then as the winter unfolded, I was trying to give him a chapter a week because he would release it serially. And he would compose music to go with the storyline on Spotify. And so I would give him a chapter a week. And as I was writing, I was like, oh, this book suddenly is about me journeying through grief. So the main character's name is Andrew, and I suddenly I was Andrew. And obviously I wasn't grieving the loss of my life partner, but I was grieving somebody I really deeply cared about and through a really tragic loss. So I don't know, God doesn't do things to God doesn't make us suffer, but it was knowing that that's how the book came about. God also knows what is going to happen over the span of our life. And so I felt like God was giving me a way to walk in it. And he gave it to me before it even happened.
I literally got the chills.
Yeah.
Oh,
I love that how you expressed how you even knew she had a skill for writing. In elementary school, God knew that he gave you those tools to be able to write things and put your thoughts out on paper or typing them. And then he knew that's how you could grieve. He's I don't need to do all of this other stuff. She knows she has the tools that I've provided for her. I made her this way. It's just like, that's a beautiful thing. I'm like so sorry for your loss and all of that. So I'm just glad that you can share that through words, and beautiful words too. We find so much inspiration in nature, and it seems like you were able to find that in like a physical way, which is so cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm like, honestly, like, I'm like, well, there, we can end the episode here.
Do we have tissues in the podcast studio?
But I, just kind of going through, like, hearing your story. This is like the second time I think I've heard this story. Like, and I'm just like kind of picking up more and more like little, kind of those little like roses that God leaves. And he's like, you're not going to understand why you're picking this up, but like at the end of the day, you're going to know. And, as you're writing the book, like, what was kind of like your experience of like this kind of simultaneous like adventure experience of like grieving while writing something that's like gonna touch people while you're gearing up to kind of go on another mission trip, or like you're in the Smoky Mountains, so you're kind of you're still ministry, grief, writing a book that hopefully is gonna like and is touching people all around, like your community in the States and wherever else people are finding the music to audio version in the book now. But, what was that kind of like experience of that toying between hope, grief, future, past?
Yeah, so when I was writing the book, first it was just for this audio version of it. And I didn't necessarily know who would be listening, but I did have the chance to meet Josh's family when they came out to Glacier for to take care of things. And Josh has a brother too that has become a good friend of mine. But I would send the family the podcast, and they found a lot. Like, they would come to me, and we're good friends now. Like, this is an act of kindness of God. If like the Euros are my friends, but I just like noticed that somebody else was finding hope and joy in what I was writing, which doesn't take away from the pain, but it's like a way to see redemption in it, that God would use a hard thing to hopefully allow me to walk with other people. And obviously as you're writing or as you're going through grief, you're not thinking that far ahead, but like, I think the experience of writing it was therapeutic for me because, I just thought about like the different dangers that can happen with grief because I was going through them, like the desire to just forget everything.
Yeah.
Another pitfall is being angry and angry at God. And so like that's an episode in the book. And it was like I would write it, but even if I wasn't feeling hopeful or joyful, somehow it ended that way, that scene. And like, I feel the Spirit in that. Like, the Spirit was like, you might feel this right now, but like there is hope and joy on the other side of this. So just keep going, like keep walking. And that's, I don't know, that's life. Like, it's hard, there's suffering, but like we don't live expecting that this is all we get. Yeah. So I feel like in some ways I'm still waiting for the joy part, but one of the joys that has come out of it is that it has been well received by a family that I've come to love. And my hope is that people who read it will just feel seen. Because I think if you feel seen going through this stuff, it takes away a lot of the loneliness.
Yeah.
And so that's Andrew's journey, is like he feels seen through it. And at the end finds, without giving things away, just like the sense of community that he finds doesn't take away the grief, but it gives him a place to stand within it, which has been my experience.
And I love, and I don't know if it's in the back, like kind of the like overview, but this idea of coming and seeing and how that can play also into grief. And I also am like, wow, God, like you're so wildly, beautifully crazy, because even with like this being around Christmas time, like we get that invitation as the manger scene to come and see this humble child. And even in the book and your story, like God being like, come to me in your grief and see me in comforting you. And you see it again then in at Easter time, where it's like, come and see the empty tomb. Like, I think those words are so powerful. And have you was that kind of like your kind of maybe background mental narrative of this idea of coming and seeing the empty tomb, like Christ is risen, like we have this hope in eternal life. Like, what was that kind of like, how did that come about in the book without giving things away? Because I want people to read it, but I'm also like,
please, I'm
that's
excited.
that's such a powerful thing, because like with Christmas coming and seeing the child that's born, you know, in grief too, and people at this time of year can be grieving loved ones that they've lost, and to come and see like God is good.
Yeah. The the come and see of it is that like Andrew, the mountains start calling to him and he just goes. And obviously we've read like certain passages of the Bible, you're like, oh, okay, like Jesus calls and then they come. But I think I've never heard what you just articulated was so like well put, that God is inviting us to come to see what he has done too through Jesus. And I feel like, I don't know, in the book at least, there isn't any explicit talk of like God in the book. But writing it, my hope is that people who maybe don't, like they aren't going to pick up a book by a popular Christian author because maybe they aren't Christian. Like but they like fiction and they like nature. Like maybe they'd pick this up and hear the invitation that happens through something that isn't explicitly, because the back mentions Jesus. Like Jesus is completely in here, but my hope is that because God's calling to all of us through means that aren't just in the church or in Sunday school, and like the way that we live our lives every day is hopefully people will be like, I'm curious what she's up to. Like there's something about her that I want to come and see more and find out why she's so joyful, or why she's able to walk in this way despite being in this state in life. Like we all go through those times, but it's the idea that like our lives are supposed to be something that invite people to come and see who Jesus is. And so that's sort of, if I'm going to see that in the book, it's in the way that it does it, I hopefully implicitly. But I need to chew on that more because I haven't heard that expressed that way. That's like so wise.
But I think too, like, you know, going back to even like your story, and I think as people begin to adventure through this coming of knowing God, like even like when you were on that missions trip where God is like, what is your priority? He's like, actually, like come to this missions trip and see how it's going to change your life. Like I think it's always a constant invitation that we see multiple times, like you were saying, like in every aspect of our life, happy, sad, joyful, grief, all the things. And I love how the book is kind of this invitation for people to, you know, explore like, what does that mean for me? And to start asking those questions of like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And then dive deeper. And I think that's so clever too. I think it's beautifully clever.
It's very profound in the sense where like you may not find yourself in a tradition mission field, or maybe if you're a listener and you're like, well, I can't see myself doing anything like that. But even just being in the normal interactions of your everyday life, like you were saying you worked 40 hours, you know, at the mercantile or something.
Sure
so
did.
I'm sure even like those people that you were helping at the store were even touched by like, oh, well, she was so cheerful. And like, that was really a blessing. And that might have not been like on your clock mission field, but it was like, God can still move you and work through you in all those ways too. When you were saying to Shannon how like you might have to wait for the joy, I feel like sometimes God says, come and see, and you might go on a missions trip, but you don't see how he changed your life until like a year or so later. I went on a missions trip to Mexico in high school. Our school is connected with an organization down there just across the border. But I went for the wrong reasons because, you know, my friends all signed up and it was going to be a fun bus ride and all these things. And I was really connected to my boyfriend at the time too. So I didn't go with him. And like the whole time I was down there, I was thinking about him and what he was doing and like, oh, I can't wait to come back. And like, I don't really feel like I'm helping. I don't speak Spanish. And so I went, but I didn't see how God was working in my life until like way later. And then I looked back on the notes I took or like the Bible verses I highlighted. And then I understood, like, oh, now I can see where God was working and all those things. And so, like, the next year that I went, it was like a totally different experience where, like, I had my priorities straight and I felt that calling a little bit more heavy. So it's just so neat how people can, it's not a cut and paste everything all the time. It's very, like, gray and not so black and white.
I sure wish we didn't have to wait till later to see what God is doing. I'm like, why can't we see what's going on right now? But it does seem to be that way. It's always in retrospect.
And what a beautiful way to do that in a book form too, where at the time you kind of wrote a little bit before and then after, all the things too that happened, all the things that were happening in your life as well. But that's a beautiful way to just express that time. And then you could read this, to your own kids someday or like further down the line, and you could read it, to anyone who needs that extra little, hang in there. The joy is coming. Yeah.
Were you, I'm just curious, were you still writing this book when you were in Mexico?
I was not. It was done, but I had no intention of publishing it. Which is another cool God story if you have the time. I'll tell it really quick. I just was I'd written a story for this small publishing company's journal once, and they I had written this thing, and then they had reached out to me while I was in Mexico, and they were like, "Hey, will you read this other guy's story and tell us what you think because you've written for us before? Would love to hear your perspective." I was like, "Sure, I'll do that." Did that, and then it made me think, well, like, why not send this? Like, maybe if they trust me this much, maybe I'll send them this. But I had prayed. I remember pacing in my parents' basement. I know, but I don't live there, okay?
We're all there. We're all there. No shame. No shame.
I was pacing in my parents' basement, and I was like, God, I really want to, please use this story somehow. And if you want, and this was before Mexico, I was like, I'm not going to do anything with it, but if you want something to happen, like, please make a way. And then I tried to set it aside, which I'm really bad at because control. But then, so in Mexico, I was like, you know what? Maybe this is a prompt. I will send it to them. So I sent it to them. They were like, yeah, we would love to publish this, which of course I was like crying. I was so excited. The cool thing though is, so fast forward to April, I have 2 months left in Mexico, and the publisher reaches out. I was like, we need you to start looking for endorsements. So ask people to read the book and give their review of it. We know some people and we'll do the same. So you do your stuff, we'll do ours. And so the other thing that you need to know is, like, from September through June at the Migrant Center, there were some really tough times. And so when things would get tough, I would sing this little like hymn to myself. I don't want to sing it because I'm not a singer, but you're a singer. Maybe you'll know it. It's called I Love You, Lord. It's like, I can try like a little part. It's like, I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
To worship you, oh my soul, rejoice.
Yes, that one.
That was not the tune, but you know what I'm talking about.
I thought it was pretty good. So we're turning this into karaoke night.
Oh, God. So I would sing that to myself not every day, but frequently at the Migrant Center. Fast forward to April, the publisher is like, hey, this woman that we have connections with wrote this review of your book. They sent it to me. It was super sweet. You can read it in the book. And they were like, you might know her. She penned the hymn, I Love You, Lord.
Oh.
Yeah.
More goosebumps.
And I was crying because I was like, you're kidding me. Like, I feel like that was God's wink. Like, I was like, I'm in it. See? Like, I'm in it. And I don't know. So, like, I don't really care how many people read it. It feels like God has been working in it to, like, be a balm for me and the people I love. But, like, that was just such a sweet extra hug.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've even said that too when we write our own studies or we just wrote an advent calendar. Sometimes we write it because we need it. And then it's like, well, if we share it with other people, then, like, that's a blessing too. Yeah. So you needed that like little wink and that extra little oomph to be like, this is, your calling and I'm blessing this project. That's always nice to have that affirmation because sometimes you're right, we don't see it right away. Yeah. So it was like, haha, you're on the right track.
Well, and it goes back to that first question that got asked you when you were kind of in this whole season of like, I don't know what I'm doing, of like, what's your priority? Like, your priority wasn't to publish a book going into all of this. Like, you just wanted to experience the Lord and grow closer with him and kind of figure out what your life had to at the same time. And then to see now, it's like, okay, like, I wrote this book and my priority isn't really to publish it. But God's like, oh, whoa, wait. I got you. Like, I know this isn't your priority, but right now it's my priority in a way. And like to see how God can move in those different like places and spaces of, he asked you that question 3 years before you actually you're publishing this book. That is a journey of grief that you're personally experiencing along with like a handful of other people that are now family that were strangers. And to think like how, what if you weren't there? Like, how would that family be grieving now if they didn't have that tour? They didn't have like your skill of writing from elementary school to now. Like, God is just so cool and how he weaves different stories, and why I love doing this podcast of like, let's dive deep in between the pages of like, I feel like every time we have a guest, it's like, oh, wait. Let's go back here because this is like a connection to this page of your life, which is this page and now this, and it's all God.
Yeah.
Hence why we called it Between the Pages.
Gosh, that's so perfect.
But going kind of, book is out now. People can go buy it off of like Kindle, Amazon,
Barnes and
Noble, all the things. What does come and see mean to Shannon post this book being published to the world practically, and kind of continuing through this, maybe we're a little bit of the back end of this grief journey, but kind of, you've processed this grief through this book. And now you're like at this, not this finish line of this book, but you're at this starting point for this book of sharing the story and sharing the mission of who Jesus is now moving forward. What does that look like for Shannon now?
Gosh, I mean, yeah, I don't sound like a broken record, but like, I hope that, like, I mean, I'm discerning, other vocational callings now, and like, I don't know if it's pastoral or counseling, or I'm in seminary, so I'm supposed to figure it out, I guess. But, but like, yeah, my hope when I think of Come and See, it's like, I think when I first came back from the mission trip back freshman year of college, I thought, oh, like it's so exciting. And I was on that high of like learning more about God and discovering Jesus and relationship with him. And then everything that happened with Josh was like this moment of like, okay, but do you actually believe what you've been saying you believe? Because either the resurrection is real or it's not. And there was a point of like hitting a wall of being like, I have to. It's not just something I do every week anymore. I either believe it or I don't. And suddenly faith wasn't like fun and exciting. It was like really hard and really painful, but also like super necessary. And so I don't think that the message of like Come and See, freshman me was like, oh, like it's so intriguing, and it still is. And I'm still like learning more about Jesus every day. But it's also like, oh, even in the hard places, come and see. Like, it's not like your life will be instantly better in a million ways because you have a relationship with Jesus. But like when life gets hard, because it's not if, it's when, you have Jesus with you walking and creating redemptive ways forward. So like, come and see all of that. Like the good things that God has done since Josh has died don't take away from the pain, but it shows that God is real and good, and that he grieves just like we do, and his heart hurts when things happen in this world. So Come and See is not to come and join this like joyful, we're going to pretend everything's okay Christian movement. It's this like, no, to be Christian means that you will be part of the world, and that means the suffering that happens on this side of the resurrection. But like, come and see that that's not the end of the story.
Yeah, come and see the empty tomb.
Yeah, so good. I haven't thought of that.
It's I mean, yeah. And I think like your story, the book, just how God is using you is so encouraging. And I don't know, do you have any other like last minute questions?
No, I'm just encouraged by your story and just all the ways that you've already seen God work in your life. And I'm excited to like hear back from you a year from now and be like, wow, you did that. Like God moved in that way, and give us more goosebumps and all of those things. So
likewise.
Yeah, just encouraged by you.
And we usually end the episode with like, what's like one bit of encouragement or a challenge. And I think you kind of left that of, the challenge and the encouragement is to come and see and wrestle with what that means to each person individually.
For sure.
And I would say for us, like a challenge to all of you is, read the book, like support Shannon in her journey as a published author. Like, you never know, there might be a part like 2 or like a whole novel series of, something else. You never know. God can work in crazy, mysterious ways, but we'll make sure that there are links on where you can connect with Shannon, links on where you can buy the book and experience that journey of grief and experiencing that come and see journey through the pages that Shannon has written. And as she kind of brings everyone alongside a very, very personal journey of grief. And Shannon, we just want to say thank you. Thank you for your vulnerability and your encouragement and just, being obedient to the Lord in, chasing after his heart for missions and also chasing after his heart in a journey of grief where you're like, I don't know, but one thing I do know is that God is good and we're going to get through this. And it might be a week, it might be 4 years, it might be a decade, but like you said, like God is asking us to just come and see and know that he's going to be with us and all the highs and lows that life brings and in between all the pages of life. And so we want to thank you for joining us on this special episode as it is, like I mentioned before, our mid-season finale.
Well, thank you both so much. You're
absolutely
amazing friends and amazing at what you do. So it's really cool to be part of.
So glad to have you.
Well, thank you. And friends, like I had mentioned before, we are going to make sure that we have all the links on how you can connect with Shannon, how you can buy her book and read it. It can make really great holiday gifts. This episode is out before Christmas. I know that. And Amazon, I think, has it. So, hey, prime shipping. I'm just saying, it could be under the tree by Christmas Eve. But like we always are so, at the end of every episode, are so encouraged by all of you who join us each and every episode. We are going to be back in the middle to end of January. Make sure that you follow us on Instagram, Facebook, get on our email list so that we can let you know when the premiere of the back half of season 3 begins. But for now, we are going to take a few weeks off to enjoy time with friends and family this Christmas season and gear up for a very special 2025 as we turn 5? Are we 5 years old? We are 5 years old.
Yeah, I think the mystery is,
I think we are 5 years old and the podcast is 3 years old.
Yep.
We're getting old over here. But we are so excited for what's to come. And we thank you guys always for the encouragement, the support, as we just continue to journey through how to boldly seek after Jesus in between all the pages of life. Thanks, guys, and Merry Christmas. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to subscribe and rate our show to stay up to date on our latest episode releases. We'd love to hear from you, so head on over to our website or the gram, say hi, be encouraged, and join the movement as we continue to boldly seek after Jesus together. We'll see you next time on the Between the Pages podcast.